philosophy is that you keep the government out of this discussion as much as you can. Okay? And the reason I say that is because that goes against the very principle of the profession of journalism, to me, which is that you don't take an oath, but one of the principles that you learn in the most basic of journalism textbook is to hold the powerful accountable. How can you hold the powerful accountable when you're giving them or ceding your rights and giving them the power to determine your professional practices? There is an inherent contradiction in that. There's an inherent contradiction in letting the powerful decide your professional practices and your ethical principles. So I think in that sense, I would say, does ethics matters? Of course, but those ethics have to be determined by the people practicing the profession. So, of course, the question is, and there are two things that this is my third point, which is, well, then, we have, I know Sri Lanka has, I haven't had a chance to review it, though we discussed it quite a bit at this conference, has a code of ethics, and Pradeep has written about it, and I've had some chance to review it, though I haven't had, I have to say, I haven't had a chance to compare those codes of ethics with other codes of ethics around the world, globally. But if anything, if there is a discussion to be had about Sri Lanka, or for that matter, any country, you would think that one of the principles that you would seek are what other journalists around the world are doing. One of the very problematic thing I hear as I travel around the world is the journalists, this is true for people generally, but journalists also fall into that trap, that their conditions are unique, right? Their professional struggles are unique to a culture, which if you actually study the practices, you will find out that there are many more commonalities, many more struggles that you have in common with journalists around the world. So why is it that we spend so much time talking about what our differences are, right? When we should really be talking about how we have a lot in common with journalists elsewhere, right? And that, if anything, journalists around the world need to work together, work more collaboratively, right, in promoting journalism ethics elsewhere. Okay? So in that sense, and one of the things that another very problematic criticism or whatever, concern that I hear, right? Well, of course, you don't know the conditions of Sri Lanka. You don't know the conditions of India. You don't know the conditions of South Africa. Indeed, that is true. If you sitting here in Sri Lanka do not know exactly what's going on in Cape Town. You're not God. You can't be everywhere at the same time, of course. But I think the key here for journalism professionals, journalists, people who write codes, people who are involved in the practice, is to be aware of the fact that there are more similarities between people who are practicing in South Africa the same profession than there are. Of course, there are differences. There are, of course, that's going to happen, right? But as long as you understand that cultural differences exist, but cultural differences should not in any way overshadow the universality that human beings have. Okay, I think that's kind of, there are obviously differences, but the differences cannot always define us. Sometimes, especially in our professions, similarities need to define us more. Okay, and I think that's kind of, to me, that's a key, is to seek universality in these ethics codes, and make sure that filters down to your professional practice. Okay, and I think that's kind of I know it's a sort of a theoretical condition I'm creating, but I think that's quite often journalists get so bogged down onto their day-to-day production that often they don't even realize that they are in the in the production of knowledge, which is far more universal than publishing your article the next morning when it comes out. Okay, and as many of you know, sometimes the articles that you may publish tomorrow morning may have a global impact. Right? I mean, that is so true. You know, somebody in some media organization somewhere gets up in the morning, writes an article, and it can lead to a revolution. So, you know, and sometimes it doesn't even have to be a revolution that takes place in Colombo, right? It can take place somewhere else, right? And what are you going to say? Oh, no, that's a wrong revolution. That article was meant only for Sri Lanka. I can't believe somebody else read it in Tunisia, right? And is now using that information. So in that sense, whether you like it or not, the impact is already universal. Right? My last point here, because I'm sort of running out of breath and my throat. So, and then we can have a discussion, definitely. My last point here is one about technology. Okay? And I stated that elsewhere during the last 2 days, is do not let technology define your profession. Okay, absorb this technology to strengthen your profession. Okay? I don't think the technology itself will lead to ethical practices. Your ethical practices will define the technology. Okay? And I think we are seeing that particularly in social media. We're seeing that particularly in the use and abuse of social media. Okay, and I always tell my students, okay, this is if you have a Facebook, that's fine. Keep your Facebook, your own Facebook, right? But also remember, beyond being yourself, you're also a journalist. Keep that in mind as you develop your Facebook account. Okay, and we have had long discussions. I've had people come in, and you know, there is a real understanding now among my colleagues who teach broadcast journalism, for instance, is they don't believe that there are any secrets on the internet. There are no secrets on the internet. Keep that in mind, they say to their students, and I say to my students, as you develop your Twitter account, your Facebook account, and use the information from Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere. So in that sense, again, but at the same time, I mean, if you are going to use any of these new technologies as sources, you are going to do exactly the kind of investigative journalism that you would do what people were doing 50 years ago. You would make sure that the source is credible. You would double check the source. You would make sure that they're cited properly. You would do exactly the same things. Okay? So in that sense, I think social media or any of those media are not going to change. I hope they're not going to change the practices that you are being taught at this university or elsewhere, right? The fundamentals still need to be as they were when the profession first started, which are based on accuracy, independence, and truth-seeking. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I mean, clearly I can continue for a long time, but I'm going to stop here and have you ask me any questions. Well, not any questions, but questions about ethics, globalization, and any questions that you may have about the professional practices that you may face every day.